Welcome to the Parenting with Impact podcast with your hosts Elaine Taylor-Klaus and Diane Dempster, co-creators of ImpactParents.com, an online community, award-winning blog, and service organization helping parents all over the world to raise complex kids become capable, independent adults.
Hi everyone, Elaine and Diane here, and we know that you want your complex kids to grow up to be happy and independent, and yet you're not always sure how or when to help with that.
In this podcast, we'll encourage you to collaborate with all kinds of complex kids and support them in navigating life and learning.
And we'll interview leading experts from around the world, as well as parents in our own community, talking about how training for parents actually helps these complex kids.
We'll talk about the issues we hear parents struggling with all the time and how a coach approach can support and empower your amazing young people.
We won't tell you what to do. We're going to help you figure out how. So let's move on to the next conversation. Welcome back, everybody, to another conversation in the Parenting with Impact podcast. You've got Elaine and Diane again here today because
this is part two. Part two.
Right. So last time we were all met, when you last saw our heroes, we talked about 4 potential sources of conflict that are really common in our family dynamics. And today we want to take you through some remedies. So it's great to identify why we have these problems. Let's start talking about what do we do about it, right?
Let's do something. Yeah.
Let's do something about it.
Well, and just quickly to recap from the last episode, please go back and listen to it if you haven't yet. Yeah. But the first one was power and priorities, like whose priorities mattered more, who has the power to make a decision about whose priorities matter more, those sorts of things. Trust and closeness, which is about whether or not the other person feels like you have their back. Respect and recognition, which is like, do I feel valued as a person, my perspectives, my life experience, and unrealistic expectations and lagging skills, which is about mostly our kids and sometimes our co-parents or whoever else who have different challenges from a neurodiversity perspective. And sometimes we set unrealistic expectations for them and it leads to conflict. So how do we want to jump in?
Well, so I want to share with you that I just had a conversation this morning with a member of our community who just finished taking Sanity School, the live class we did recently. And what's really jumping out at me is when I talked to her about, and she was calling because she had an amazing experience with it. She's got an almost 17-year-old son. No, almost 18-year-old son. And when I asked her certain questions to kind of probe, she was trying to figure out what does she want to do next, right? What kind of coaching? What we actually ended up talking about, what she got from Sanity School was the awareness of that sort of power dynamic. Whose agenda is it? Really helped improve some of the respect recognition piece, understanding the lagging skills, the trust and the closeness. And, I actually asked her on a scale of 1 to 10, where do you feel like you are right now in terms of your relationship with your son? Because 17-year-old kid could be anywhere on that spectrum. And it was very high. It was like a 9, right? And part of that was because she had had a lot of stuff reinforced in Sanity School. So I'm sharing that because that's what she took away from it. And I thought, and it's so correlative to what we're talking about today, which is when we lean into the relationship, when we come from a place of collaboration and respect, when we understand what's underlying their challenges and begin to foster ownership in their agenda, it reduces conflict. Right? In a powerful way.
Well, and I guess what's coming up for me is a couple of things. Elaine is like thinking about the independence pyramid, and we can reference people back to that diagram and the fact that
podcast episode.
And that podcast episode. Yeah. Thank you. And at the base of that is relationship, trust, and communication. And those are key aspects to this.
Yeah.
And so that's that great reminder of once you start building that foundation, it doesn't mean that conflict goes away. And I think that this is the thing I want to reiterate. Right. We talked about this last time. Conflict is normal. We always have conflict. We have different worldviews. Life would be boring if there wasn't conflict. If everybody liked the same movie, if everybody had the same perspective on how to handle different issues, it's part of what makes relationships juicy and engaging. And if we can see what's really going on underneath it, the conflict, instead of just going, okay, we're fighting, or we're arguing. I mean, we talked about the difference between ending the argument and resolving the conflict. A lot of times, and we teach this in Sanity School, we focus on the triggers, we focus on trigger management, we focus on communication skills and those sorts of things. And that helps us to not navigate conflict with arguing potentially. And the conflict still happens if you can get down to what's really going on here. As we see the world differently, or I feel like I don't think you see my perspective in this, or I feel like you're setting unrealistic expectations for me, or whatever it happens to be.
Right. And when you get some of these skills in place, you're able to design and have really effective conversations. She gave an example of her child actually having had some in-class suspension, some school-related, stuff, and using these tools and addressing these issues, actually having a really constructive conversation with him instead of, having things devolve and blow up. Okay. So power and priorities. Whose priorities matter more? Who has the power to decide? Whose agenda is it? I might say, what's the remedy? How do you want to address that?
I think that the way I want to address that is this is one of the things I think you and I model really well, is this sort of, it's identifying that different people have different perspectives, different people have different priorities, and talking about how you're going to resolve that, right? It's just sort of, you want this, I want that. Let's see the fact that those are two different things. How do we want
without making either of us wrong for it?
Exactly, right? It's just sort of, this is the way you see it, this is the way I see it. So how are we going to decide? Are we going to try to find the yes and, which is what we always encourage parents to do, is like, how do you get what you want and I can get what I want? Is there a way to navigate that? Or do we say, this time you'll pick the movie and next time I'll pick the movie, which might be another way to do it? Or if there happens to be a situation where, safety is involved, sometimes as parents, we might say, you know what?
Just going to have to go with me on this one.
I'm going to have to go with my no, because I need to step in and play I'm the mom card. And we want to be careful not to do that all the time. But if we say, but it's the conscious decision, and it's conscious decision-making process, right? It's this sort of acknowledging that we see it differently, and then saying, how are we going to navigate this conflict, knowing that we see it differently? What would you add?
Well, and what comes up as I hear you say that is, what are we always talking about? We're always talking about being in the process, right? This is about a process-oriented approach to problem solving instead of a solution-oriented approach. And when we look at what are the steps along the way, when we understand whose priorities are involved and what's important to them, we're going to get to different results. I know I keep coming back to this woman, but it was just such a perfect example today. Part of the reason they were able to have this really successful conversation and to plan it out and to have it without stress and all of that was because she understood that his motivation to go out with his friends that night was a legitimate motivation for him.
Yeah.
Right. And what was in it for him was not to sit down with my parents and have a constructive conversation. He wanted to be able to get through something respectfully so that he could get to what he was motivated by. So getting clear on everybody's priorities and values is really important.
Well, and I'm flashing back to one of the things that we teach in the young adults class, and the fact that as adults, it's often much easier for us to see our kids' perspective than it is for our kids to see our perspective. And just acknowledging that and knowing that, hey, it might be hard for you to say, well, Johnny, this is the way I see it as your parent, as an adult. I'm 60 years old and I've had all this life experience and you should listen to, well, our kids are not going to see that the same way as we're going to remember what it was like to be 18 or 14 or 22 or whatever it is,
or 10,
because we've been through that and we can grab their perspective differently. And so there may be additional processing to do to really help your child gently see your perspective and potentially what's in it for them, right?
Yeah, often, always what's in it for them. Yeah, as I was listening to him thinking, okay, so what we're really saying is we have to be the grownups here.
Oh my gosh, yes.
So we have to understand.
Can I say that? We don't want that. We don't like to have to be the grown up.
And to do that, wait, let me just finish the thought, right? To do that, that means we have to respect that our priority is our priority, but that, and that theirs may be different, ties into this other one of respect and recognition. We have to respect that they are separate, autonomous, independent beings separate from us, and we may not agree with each other, but their perspective is real and it's theirs. Yeah. Sorry. Wait, we're going to say.
Well, no, I was just even thinking it's not even when it's just our kids do we have to be the grown-ups. Sometimes when we're in arguments with our co-parents or our partners or our
siblings,
whoever,
parents,
anybody, right? It's this sort of, I had a mom the other day. It's like, why do I always have to be the grown-up? My rule is that if you recognize that there's an opportunity for somebody to be the grown-up,
it's probably your job.
It's probably your job.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Sad, but true.
Yeah. We could go down a whole rabbit hole on that, but let's not. Let's move on.
Yes. The second one is about trust and closeness, which is this idea that you have my back on this. How do we remedy it when somebody feels like you don't get it, you don't understand my perspective, you're the enemy, whatever.
Well, and I think that ultimately it's about building trust, right? It's about building trust all the time, not just in those moments of conflict, and especially not in those moments of conflict, but taking the time in our relationships with our kids to build trust in other ways, to acknowledge them, to make sure they feel seen. Yeah. Right. To not just catch them being good, although there's a lot in that, but to acknowledge who they are. And again, kind of their individuality, but to show enough interest in who they are and respect for that they begin to develop a trust of us. Often what happens to parents when they've come to us, I think, Diane, by the time they get to this point, right, for many, there's been a distrust or a mistrust that's cultivated on both sides. The kids have kind of stopped trusting the parents who are in director mode, and the parents have kind of stopped trusting the kids because they feel like they have to be in the director mode. Go ahead. What?
Well, and they don't trust themselves, right? It's this there's this sort of, especially neurodiverse kids or adults, right?
I was going to say, and by that you mean both the parents and the kids.
Yes, exactly. Right. So I don't trust myself to stand up for myself as a mom, or I don't trust myself that I can do this thing that I'm supposed to do. I mean, there's all this sort of breakdown in trust that happens in the dynamic, right?
Right. Or my kid feels like they're not sure, but they're going to come out fists fighting, right? They're going to come out battling, even if they're not sure, if they feel backed into a corner. Right. So working on relationship, you've heard us say many times, if you don't know where to start, lean into relationship and lean into self-care. So when you lean into relationship, you build trust.
Well, and what I always think about, essential. I don't know if I've talked about this on the podcast before, but I think about trust as a marble jar. Like in every interaction we have with somebody, either takes the marble out or puts a new marble in or leaves the marbles alone. Right. And so we want to look for more moments that add marbles or leave the marbles alone, rather than those moments that take the marbles out, which takes us back to, I think, that first bullet that we were talking about a few minutes ago. It's like, if you're the kind of parent who's constantly going, well, I'm the mom, I get to decide. Well, I'm the mom, I get to decide. Well, I'm the mom, I get to decide. Then in that moment where you really need to be the mom and decide, it's going to be harder because your kid doesn't have the trust that you're going to sometimes see their way in it.
Well, and as I'm hearing you in the marble jar, I just want to add, and sometimes we need to pour in some sand to fill in the spaces. Right. And that's where the building trust comes. It sets the stage. It gives a foundation for everything else. Yeah. So that was just the visual that came to me.
Well, so you want to do it like building trust is something that happens in every moment. It's not something that's like either here one day and it's gone the next day. It's this constant iterative process of building trust and rebuilding trust.
And if you've got a kid where you feel like they lie a lot, or there's a lot of reasons why you can't trust them, and there's probably very legitimate reasons why you don't feel like you can trust them, understand that what Diane just said is so essential. The goal is to start building the trust, is on both sides, is to build back the trust. Because on some level, when they were little, it was there. And that those neurons are there somewhere, right? And what we want to do is build the trust with our kids. And so if we catch our kids get in trouble for something. I remember one of my kids get in trouble for something significant. The conversation wasn't, I can't trust you anymore. The conversation was, well, it looks like we've got some work to do to build back our trust for you. Yeah. And that's a very big distinction.
Well, and just that language, Elaine, is so powerful.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we've got an opportunity here to build back some trust. Is very different than I can never trust you or I can't trust you kind of thing. Yeah. Love that. Okay. So related, but slightly different is respect and recognition. Do you value me as a person, my perspective, my life experience? You were talking about this a little bit earlier. It's this sort of acknowledging that everybody's perspective is their perspective.
Yeah.
And
their perspective is their reality, really.
I was having a conversation with somebody the other day about truth with a capital T and truth with a little t, right? And it's this sort of, there's so few things in this world that are actually true with a capital T, because we all see the world so differently and have had such different life experiences and such different values and everything else. And so this idea that there are some universal truths is a hard thing to really kind of contemplate. I mean, I'm sure there are if we sat and debated that. I'm not suggesting we do, but the point here is everybody's going to see the world through their own lenses. And the minute we call them right, wrong, good, bad, we're losing an opportunity to show respect and to recognize their worldview.
Well, and I think there's also, yes. And adding to that, there's this notion that we feel like our kids we have to earn their respect, that they have to earn our respect. And I think we kind of turn that on its head a little bit and start with the notion that everybody's deserving of respect. Everybody's deserving of respect. And, we teach a tool in Sanity Schools called ABI, Assume Best Intention, right? Let's start with the assumption without judgment that our kids are deserving of and worthy of respect, that their perspective, their voice matters. And how do we honor that and respect that and still get done whatever it is we're trying to get done or move through, but to do it from a place of, it's not that they have to earn our respect in order for us to respect them, but that we start by respecting them unless somehow they've lost our trust, right?
Well, and
then we can re-earn that, but it's different from respect, right? Go ahead.
Well, and I think that's the thing is like so much we equate needing to agree with each other here, right? It's this sort of, I have to agree with you in order to respect you. We have the same conversation around compassion. It's like, I have to agree with what you're saying in order to have compassion for it. No, that's not it. The whole point is you have a right to your worldview. You have a right to your perspective. And I respect that you have that right to your perspective. I may not like it, but if I show that I may not agree with it, and that's where you can work through the conflict. But if you start with, wow, this is your worldview, it makes sense for you that you can see it this way. And I respect that instead of me trying to make you wrong because you're not sharing my worldview. I mean, that goes a huge way in terms of managing this.
And that's so key, right? It's that we can, we all know that old term, agree to disagree. Well, let's look at it from a different angle. We can respect that we don't agree on something and trust that the truth is somewhere in the middle, because it usually is. And I can respect that just because we see things different ways or have different opinions or ideas doesn't make either of us wrong. That's the thing, is that we often tend to try to make someone else wrong in order to make us right. And what you're saying is that we can both be right from our lens and use that respect as a way to forge forward to find a common path where we can work it out or negotiate or whatever. But if we're so busy making the other person wrong, we're not really pulling back to look at the bigger picture of the issue.
Well, and bonus points, if you notice yourself in this sort of you're wrong, I'm right mode, or in the blame game or wherever it is, that's a great indication that maybe one of you is dysregulated and needs to, take some space or take a few deep breaths or go listen to our podcast about triggers.
Good point. Excellent point. All right. We got one more to talk about: unrealistic expectations and lagging skills, right? And this is really common in the world of neurodiversity and our complex kids. A lot of our kids are 3 to 5 years behind their same age peers in some aspects of their development, but not all, which is part of what makes it a little complicated. Again,
and frustrating sometimes.
Refer you to the podcast on the 3 to 5 year lag. I'm sure we have one. So how do we deal with that?
Well, I think that there's a couple pieces of this. One is making sure you are setting realistic expectations and navigating that, right? So if you're noticing, well, my kid's not doing this, even though I'm asking them to, or my co-parent isn't doing this, even though I'm asking them to, pull from the last 5 minutes and say, assume best intention. maybe it's not a realistic expectation for my partner to remember X, Y, and Z without some reminder system. Or, maybe it's not a realistic expectation for my kid to be able to get all their homework done if nobody's at home with them in the afternoon after school, or whatever the kind of expectation is. So the first thing is to say, okay, this is not a realistic expectation. And what's the rule of thumb I always use? If they don't do it independently 80% of the time, it's probably not a realistic expectation. So a couple of things. One is to go back and catch them up. So you're talking about lagging skills, Elaine, and 3 to 5 years behind their peers. They may need us to help them to develop the skills that they have that are lagging. A lot of times, particularly in school-based skills, like when in third grade, when they're teaching everybody to use a planner, our kids weren't ready to start using a planner. So now when they're like in 5th and 6th and 7th grade, it's like, okay,
or
wait.
9th and 10th.
All right, yeah, no judgment. Whatever year it happens to be, when they're ready to start using a planner, somebody needs to help them figure out, how do I fit this into my life? Or how do I maybe not use a planner? We always talk about not making it about the solution, but they're ready to come up with a system to help them remember what their assignments are. They may need you to not just assume they can do the thing, but to help them create a process or a structure to do the thing.
And so sometimes it's about that. And sometimes another example that was coming to me, another parent I was talking to today was talking about one of the things she heard us say in Sanity School was the notion, because our kids are 3 to 5 years behind, realizing that maybe her kid wasn't coming in late because he didn't care about curfew. Maybe he really was struggling with time blindness and time management. And what if we problem solve around that, or accept that he's not doing it, that naughty versus neurological thing, right? It changes how we're going to respond. It changes how we deal with whatever the problem is, or the challenges that we're trying to address.
Well, and underneath all of this is that constant drive for curiosity and saying, what are all the things that might be going on underneath this? I mean, isn't that one of the quintessential questions we teach in Sanity School? We teach all the time is like, don't start by assuming, oh, he's late, he doesn't care about his curfew. Have the conversation, figure out, assume best intention. I mean, all these things that kind of tie in together. The other thing that comes up for me... I was
going to say, we have one more thing before we wrap. This is really important.
Yeah, no, the other thing that kind of comes up around this unrealistic expectations is perfectionism. And sometimes it's really hard to let go of that. We like to do things a certain way. We like to do things our way. And,
I'm a recovering perfectionist, or I'm a perfectionist in recovery. Yeah. What it should say.
The thing I always joke about is the dishwasher, right? It's this sort of like, everybody has their own perfect way of how to organize the dishwasher. And my partner and I constantly, he reorganizes the inside of the dishwasher, and then I'll reorganize the inside. I mean, it's like this constant back and forth. Whoever happens to be the last one before it gets run, hopefully they're the one that unloads it and doesn't go, oh, gosh, here we go again. We're organizing it differently. But it's that sort of, we like things the way we like it. And that's fine when it doesn't impede on anybody else's need, desire, whatever else, to have things the way that they like it, or the way that's easier for them.
So similar to perfectionism. So there is a letting go of perfectionism piece, right? But I also want to go back to the whole beginning of this whole thing, which is there's also a letting go of control. Because part of what I noticed when I went to my son's graduation, so I was traveling with young adults and a grandparent, so 3 generations, and everybody's got their way of doing things. And everybody's trying to direct, not because they're trying to control necessarily, but because they're all accomplished at getting their way through the world the way that they get their way through the world.
Right.
Right. And so if we are constantly up against it, instead of going, oh, you do it that way, then, it changes the whole nature of it. If we understand that when our kids are being combative or persistent or whatever, sometimes it's because they see a way of doing something in the world that works for them.
Well, and a quote that just kind of pops in overarching all of this is and there's so many variations of this, but do you want to be right or do you want to be happy?
Yeah.
And it's this sort of, it's so easy and when you're in coping mechanisms and you're overwhelmed and you are in control mode, it's hard to do that. But if you're doing it just because I've always done this and I want to do it the way I want to do it. Yeah. Let it go. Find a way to let it go, or find a way to, like, we'll do it this way this time. We'll do it my way next time. I mean, there's this is the thing. We're navigating conflict. The conflict is you like it your way. I like it my way. How do we want to handle that? It's not a matter of winning and losing. It's about navigating the conflict.
Yeah. Beautiful. This was an awesome conversation. I love this. And we've got to wrap it up. So took lots of notes. We'll have lots of links in the show notes. So if any of the topics we talked about today are good reference points for you, we'll have some good links to either other podcast episodes or articles in the show notes today.
And so take a minute before we close off. What do you want to most take out of our conversation today? What stood out for you that maybe you want to just make sure you remember for the next few days? Take back into some conflict at your house or turn into some actions. Take some notes for yourself, either mentally or on a piece of paper, and take them from there. How do you want to wrap this up, Elaine?
That's it, y'all. Take this insight. What do you want to do with it in the coming week? And trust that if you're here, if you're listening, you are doing what your kids need, engaging in a conscious conversation with yourself about how to be the parent or the professional provider you want to be with complex kids. So kudos to you, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care, everybody.
You've been listening to the Parenting with Impact podcast with Elaine and Diane. For more information on the Impact Parents community or to join Sanity School for Parents, please visit impactparents.com. If you like what you've heard, please share this podcast with friends who need similar guidance and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For the essentials of Elaine and Diane's coach approach to parenting, download a free tip sheet at impactparents.com/podcast.
Behavior therapy training for parents is actually recommended as a first-line treatment for complex kids. For information about Sanity School, our training program for parents or teachers, which has helped thousands of families around the globe, visit impactparents.com/sanityschool.